Let's create a pivotal impact. Friends in the industry. So have you ever wondered what is the cost of your communication style? So for example, if you're a supervisor or even a parent that regularly raises their voice and demands expectations, what's the typical response you receive from the person you're speaking to? So in today's episode, I'm excited to bring back to the Truck Focus podcast a good friend of mine, Anthony Butkovic, owner of WCBConsulting.ca. So during our conversation, Anthony walks us through a variety of situations he's experienced with claims management over the years and the impact communication styles have on the outcome. So furthermore, Anthony highlights in our conversation the power of preparation and the stress that can be eliminated altogether when you take the time to actually be prepared. So a huge takeaway from this conversation is exactly that, the cost associated with communication. So I encourage you to learn more about Anthony by checking him out on LinkedIn, which I've included in the show notes, as well as his website, WCBConsulting.ca, to learn more about the services that they offer. I've also included the direct links to his training in the show notes. So I look forward to the impact this conversation is going to have. Let's get to it. Anthony, honestly, super hyped for our conversation today. But first off, I want to welcome you back to the Truck Focus podcast. Super grateful just as an ongoing, obviously, we built a super strong relationship over almost a year now. And this has been the topic that we're going to talk about, something that I've seen so much, I'd say on social lately, where it's the soft skills of life. And it's how do you actually impact people? And what do you say, does it actually impact people? So I'm excited for us to dive through that, but also just to show, I'd say, the unity between our companies and just the way that we think. And we're impacting people, obviously, in just different industries. So welcome back.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you. No, I'm happy to be back. This was, we talked about, I got very excited. So let's rock and roll. Let's get going.
Awesome, man. Awesome. So I'll let people know they can check out episode 41 to learn a little bit more about yourself and WCB Consulting. But just to start us off, can you give us a quick recap of who you are and what your company does?
Absolutely. So I'm the president of WCBConsulting.ca, and we specialize in training and mentoring and coaching business professionals, safety professionals, anyone that has anything to do with WCB, mostly from an organizational standpoint, where we also do representation. So we'll actively manage claims and WCB claims for companies and do the appeals. But we really have started to shift our focus to training, mentorship, to kind of fill in that gap that's there. And it's been great so far. It's got a warm reception. It's growing every day. And we're very excited.
Good. Yeah, I highly recommend anyone that has a question, obviously a need from the consulting and training space. Definitely recommend that you connect with Anthony, WCBconsulting.ca. And I'm just a big advocate of what you're doing. I'm also super grateful because over the last handful of months, you've consistently contributed to our Truck Focus newsletter. And that means a lot to myself for a number of reasons. But most of all, I like the collective effort. I like the fact that I can say we are unified in impacting an industry. And that could be multiple sectors of industries that all face the same problems. And industry leaders like yourself that are willing to invest time and energy into creating a difference in a written format, to me is super cool. So yeah, highly recommend, if you haven't read his most recent newsletter article from the February one, that you do so, because I think so the topic and the title to me is really powerful. And you talk about people don't always remember what you say or do, but they always remember how you make them feel. And that's going to be, I'd say, the baseline of today's conversation when we're diving into if it's interviewing, if it's impact of language. So super excited to kind of talk about that. But yeah, thank you so much, Anthony, just for your continued investment. It's super, super awesome.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
So can you walk us through the, so if I use the term or the word empathy, can you walk us through empathy and how does it benefit or I wouldn't say it hinders. So how would it benefit an employer if they're focused on, if it's an injured worker? What does that, relationship look like with the term empathy?
Yeah, and that's a good question. I think, a lot of times when we talk about empathy, there's a little bit of confusion of what is empathy, right? And what's the difference between empathy and sympathy? And when it comes to empathy, and the way that I look at it is, I'm there to listen to what you have to say. I understand your feelings. And we're getting warm and fuzzy now talking about feelings. So I hope people are okay with that. But yeah, it's, I acknowledge your feelings. I'm listening to you. I understand the meanings of what you're saying. And the difference is I'm not taking on those same feelings and going in the situation with you. So, for example, a worker gets injured and they're afraid for losing their job. They maybe are living paycheck to paycheck. So how are they going to provide for their families? How are they going to do this? If I'm sympathetic, I take on that burden and like, oh my God, like, how am I going to help this person? And, oh, how are they going to do it? Where empathy is looking at the situation as it is, not better, not worse, and walking with that person to say, hey, here's the issues. I know what you're, worried about. Here's how we're going to make you feel better about it. Here's how we're going to work together to get the results so that what's going on in your life has the smallest impact.
Yes. And I love the word empathy. And I'm glad we went fuzzy really fast, because those that are watching couldn't see, but I jokingly gave him an air hug. But so there's a couple of things. So often organizations, there's a hierarchy. Obviously, there could be the president down to boots on the ground labor. This is an example. And oftentimes you'll see in the workplace the tyranny. There's a tyrant mentality, and you're become more and more of a tyrant the higher your title gets. And I'm a massive believer in, let's flip that on its head and say, no. I'm going to be an empathetic leader, not a tyrant leader. And if you're dealing with someone that's injured or just a day-to-day person, this understanding we're all people, and understanding that, hey, what I'm doing as your supervisor or as your boss, it has an impact on you. It has an impact on your work performance, but also has an impact on, do you even want to come to work today? Are you showing up late? Like, all those different things, those soft skills really do have an impact. And I think as we navigate through this conversation, we'll stick with the injured worker. I think it's really important for supervisors that are listening to say how you talk to people, but also how you absorb what is told to you is really important for them, but also for yourself. Because as you said, sympathy, you don't want to go home thinking, oh no, so-and-so can't pay their bills right now because they sprained their ankle. Like, you don't want that either. So how do you navigate that is, I think, super important. So in your experience, you're going on, I'd say, 15 years now, kind of in the claims industry, claims experience industry, through, if it's WCB, through your own business. How important is it for us to be mindful of just, I guess, how we speak to people post-injury?
I think it's, and I appreciate you saying, like, how would that be in claims management? I think it's in everything. I mean, let's look at it. It's, at the end of the day, every day when we wake up, we're chasing a feeling. And the decisions that we make in the day either bring us to a feeling that we want or feelings that we want to avoid. And so when we're talking about communication, how you communicate with your spouse or your family, and then just before you got to work, can impact how you communicate at work. And then once you're at work, how you communicate with one another can make a difference on production and everything else. Or you might take that home, your spouse is there. Hey, how are you doing? Welcome, this and this. And you're like, and you just go in the room, slam the door, and everyone's wondering what the hell just happened, right? So communication is a big thing. And when we're talking about communication, there's a few things that I look at. Is what is the essence of communication? And I can't remember the guy's name, and that sounds really terrible, but you can Google him. If you Google 55-38-7, that's what makes up communication. What 55 is body language. I talk about in my interview course. So 55% of what we communicate is body language. 38% is tone of voice. 7% is the words that we speak. So if you've ever had that feeling, you're talking to someone and for whatever reason, they give you the heebie-jeebies, like, it's just, it doesn't make sense. Like, something is not right with this person. Usually what it is that their spoken word either doesn't match up with their tone of voice or their body language. And subconsciously you're picking that up. So when you're talking about in the organization, and now let's go to claims. If you're talking to an injured worker or the injured worker is talking to you, we're always analyzing for threats and other things. So you're looking at this person and what they're telling you doesn't make you feel good. Oh, someone's trying to, they're trying to pull one over on me, or, this person is faking. I love this by clients, by the way. Oh, he's a player. He's He's trying to pull a fast one. No, buddy fell off a 10-foot ladder or fell off the back of the back of the truck and landed on his back and then now it's messed up. Like, let's look at it for what it is, right? But 93% of communication is nonverbal. And I think that's the part that we forget. So you'll end up in, especially when I get in conflict resolution, I'll talk to the worker, I'll talk to the company, and independently, and they'll make assumptions. They'll say, well, he said this, or she said that, or whoever said this. And you're going, no, did they really say that? No, it was the interpretation of what they said based on the nonverbal communication. Yeah, they said, I'm going to be okay. But by his tone of voice, it was like they're waiting to take, come at me. And so this is where, whenever you're in communicating, and once I figured this out, it's helped me in my personal life. I talk about that in the article. My wife will come into the office. I'm used to talking to people, and we have to be very curt, because it's, clear, direct directions. Because if we don't, things get missed. It's just like the Army. If the directions aren't clear, things get missed. The mission doesn't get accomplished, kind of thing. And she'll come in the middle, ask me what I want from Walmart, and I'm going, I don't care. But I don't mean it that way. It's just, I'm in that moment. And so she thinks she's an inconvenience, where really I'm just saying, no, just at the moment, my mind is somewhere else. So my tone of voice was not there. So I don't know if that really answered your question, but that's the thing, is that when we focus on communication, whether it's with an injured worker with us, or giving directions at work, giving directions at home, or just telling someone you love them, it's more than that. And when you're talking about relationships, especially between spouses, they say, well, I say I love you, but are they present mentally? Is your nonverbal communication saying that? And that's where a lot of things, that's where the conflict is in that nonverbal communication.
Yes. Yeah, you hit a lot really clear, which I appreciate, because being in my industry, transportation, I'm not always right next to a professional driver when they're explaining a situation. And that's one thing that I try and be really mindful of, is tone, because if they're calling me because something's happening and I'm rushed, or I'm antsy, or what do you want type attitude, totally shifts the information that I'm going to get, and they're dealing with it on the scene. So dispatchers, safety supervisors, maintenance supervisors, this is for you. Listen to how you're talking, because ultimately when they're calling, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's funny when you said that, because what I think of is that if you actually pay attention, notice that when certain people, you'll talk a certain way because it's almost safe to talk to them that way. And I'm gonna give you an example. I grew up in an Eastern European family. Like I said before in the other podcast, my parents, my dad was in trucking as a heavy duty mechanic, and so I remember my mom, she'd be screaming and yelling, just bloody murder. You're 12 years old, you mess something up. And then all of a sudden the phone rings and she's like, oh, hi, how are you? Yeah, I'm fine. Oh, this and that. And as soon as she hung up that phone, she's like, you little, and it was like, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. We do that at work. There's that one person at work, as soon as they walk in your office, like, what do you want? And then you wonder why they don't like you, or this and this. It's like, no, I tell him what he needs to know. I don't hold information from him. I'm clear on what my expectations are, but it's how you said it. So sorry to interrupt you there, but it just made me think of that.
Key. Yes. No, and you just painted a great picture. And I think, again, as reflection, but also to professional drivers, we speak to a lot of professional drivers in our community. Being mindful of how you receive information is also important. And again, that's the power of empathy, where, again, we're not perfect. It's not about being perfect. It's just being mindful. And I think when we're mindful of, because if you can't see me, but you can hear me, you can hear in my tone of voice, you don't even want to talk to me right now. And I really need to I need help. That's really important. And I think that's a huge opportunity and a huge solution to a lot of what our industry faces. So a perfect example would be there's a customer complaint because I used to drill, I'll backtrack. I used to haul equipment. And lots of times when you're delivering equipment, it's before the customer's even on location. And the customer would say to the sales rep, okay, I need this excavator dropped at the northeast corner of this place and look for a red telephone pole. And you'd be like, okay, well, I'm in the northeast corner and I see 19 telephone poles, but they're 60 feet apart. Where do you want the excavator? Because you can't always navigate an excavator, obviously, accordingly. So all of that said, if I call the dispatcher or I try and call the salesperson and say, hey, this is the directions, this is what I'm up against, and the instant response is, I don't care, figure it out. You're like, That's why I'm calling you. I'm trying to figure it out. Like, I'm not just going to put it in the wrong spot. And that's a very common occurrence. And that could just be with equipment. We move hundreds of different types of products where it's the same thing, where it's like, okay, if we could work on our telecommunication skills and we just focus on, because I'm looking at now, it's, you said the 55-38-7. So if we're focusing on how we speak to people, think of the solutions. And that could be, if you're an injured worker, someone that doesn't want to tell you because they're afraid, oh, you're just going to fire me. It's like, but where'd they get that thought from? It's like, well, because you threatened someone. So if they claim that they're hurt, they're fired. Or they're going to claim that he's playing games. Like, I think that's a huge takeaway, though, is just being really mindful with how we're talking to people. Hey, Josh here. Just a quick interruption for our episode, as I really want to encourage you to visit WCBConsulting.ca and check out the different services that Anthony and his team offer. I really think it could help you and your organization. Let's get back to the episode. But yeah, so as I was saying, when you're dealing from all angles of industries, and if you're in a position where someone needs your help, two things that I try and do. One, listen. It's really easy to say, no, let me interject them. And they just want to tell you what they're up against. And that could be post-collision, that could be post-injury, that could be, like I mentioned earlier, trying to find directions. But then the other thing is, once you actually listen, don't go on a tangent. Try and, I guess, not comfort as in like, here, I'm going to nurture you like a little baby, but try and comfort what they're up against. I hear what you're saying. Okay, let me help. Or post-collision is another example. Post-injury, first thing I always try and ask is, are you okay? I don't care about anyone else in the world right now. Are you okay? And just, again, those little soft skills do make a difference in just through my journey.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
So the question that I did have going into our conversation was, have you worked with clients, or have you seen situations where someone got injured, the supervisor that they were supposed to report to, they're a hothead, and the worker didn't fully disclose what happens? Have you been in those type of environments where they actually find out about the injury down the road?
Yeah, and sometimes it's not even the supervisor. The supervisor may be a hothead, but they're worried about someone else in a different department or somewhere in the organization. And the smaller the company, if you have those individuals in there, the worse it is. Sometimes with the bigger ones, they kind of get hidden. But yeah, absolutely. Like and where it creates issues, and this is where I think if you set up a program properly, and this is in anything, not just WCB, but since we're talking about WCB, I encourage companies to have a WCB program. Get that stuff in place before an injury happens, because here's where the issue lies, is when you have a program in place, you've assigned a team, and that team can be people that you didn't even expect to be a part of it. And they have roles and responsibilities. So when stuff hits the fan, people jump in action. They know, this is my job. This is my job. This is who I talk to about this. This is how I talk to about this. And it's critical. I mean, in transportation, logistics is critical. How you plan certain things can mean the difference between being on time or not. Well, it's the same thing with WCB. So that's the thing, is when you have a program in place, you have your team members, you have roles and responsibilities, so that when an incident happens, we all know how to jump in at what role so that everything runs smoothly. And it's the same thing with logistics in transportation. People need to know where they are, who's doing what, when is someone arriving or leaving, because if you don't, things end up in a lot of problems. There's a lot of issues. So with the WCB program, when you have it in place, when you have that hothead, it makes it a lot easier. If you have that department that isn't really, and I'm going to use the safety department, and it's not this for everybody, but typically the safety department. And there was one situation in particular where a worker reported an injury 2 weeks later and lied about how it happened. And when the person in the safety department asked the question, why would you do that? They said, well, I was afraid I was going to get in trouble. And they were really hurt, the safety person. They said, I don't understand. Like, I'm there. I have this relationship. I try to make sure that I'm there to take care of them. Like, I'm not a police officer. That's not my job. And my question was, how does frontline supervision treat the workers? Because I can bet you that worker is used to being berated for every little thing or micromanaged. So now that this incident happened, that's who they were afraid of. They weren't afraid of you. They actually got the courage 2 weeks later to tell you, because either, they got pushed to the point where they had no choice, but they didn't tell their supervisor yet. I bet you not yet. And they said, yeah, how'd you know that? I'm not being psychic, because if I was a worker or if I was a driver and I'm worried about, the person at dispatch yelling at me or giving me a hard time, I'm not going to tell them crap. You know what I mean? So what happens is when you don't create a safe environment for someone to speak, what ends up happening is they withhold information, they change information, and it defeats the purpose. And this is where I talk about, as a company, it's your job to go first. It's your job to go first and ensure that the people on your team from top to bottom create that trust. Because whenever someone gets injured or runs into a situation non-WCB related, the question they have is, am I going to be treated fairly? That's the worry they have. So if the company goes first, it makes it much easier. But if the company has a track record of treating people this way, and then all of a sudden they start being nice just in this one situation, people aren't stupid either. Why are you being nice to me now? What do you want out of the deal? And what happens is, and I talk about, like, there's 3 levels of a relationship. Level 3 is, I'm caring about you because you matter to me. And I'm going to take care of you because that's what's I'm here to serve you. And when you have a company where everyone's on the same mission, everyone's there to achieve the same goals, you look after one another. You see this in sports. The best teams are not the ones with the most superstars. It's the ones that are the most unselfish. They just said it in the Super Bowl just a couple of weeks ago. It was an unselfish team that won. Wayne Gretzky said we were an unselfish group of players who wanted to win a championship. It's the same thing. The second you start losing trust between one another, people start looking out for their own interests. So you treated me like this whole time. Now you're being nice to me. You want something from me. That's given me, the heebie-jeebies that I talked about earlier. I'm looking out for number one. I'm going to my doctor. I'm getting taken off work. Forget your modified, forget your documents. I'm doing me because you're going to fire me anyway.
Yeah.
So, and then the client turns around and says, well, they're a player. Well, how have you been treating them? And I think I said this in the last podcast as well, is that if I were to come on site or if I were to come to your workplace and I asked your employees, how do you treat injured workers when they're injured? What would they say? Yes. That's the true measure. That's the difference, because that's where you're going to get the truth from people. And it's the leader's responsibility, the owners in the company, the middle management, all the way down. It all everyone over top of someone else. It's their responsibility, 100%. And I've seen it time and time again. The companies that do well, that manage claims effectively, that have low premiums, that have low incidents, it's the ones that have a good, solid program in place. They have a team that looks out for one another, and everyone understands their roles and responsibilities. So if so-and-so isn't at work today to do the documentation, someone's there to take that place. The worker's taken care of, taken to the hospital or the doctor, gotten their treatment they need, and they're back to work that day or the next day.
It's crazy. Just walking through my own journeys. I've been an injured worker before that, and it did not go very well. And I've helped oversee injured workers where I made some mistakes. I'm a different person now, thankfully. And I think when you're talking about a plan, I think that's probably the biggest takeaway when we're thinking about, okay, what do I do though? It's having a plan in place. That way you're proactive and you're not reactive. And so-and-so's off work today. That's okay. You have a backup. Or so-and-so needs a ride to the doctor's office. Perfect. Let's coordinate. Like, I think just, having a plan in place, obviously working with yourself, working with your company to help establish a plan too, super crucial, because you don't want to guess. You don't want to think, I think this is fine. And then obviously something unfortunately happens. You're running through it being like, I don't know. It's like, okay, that's why you hire the professional, obviously, hire WCBConsulting.ca. Make sure that you actually have a plan that you understand, that your team understands. It could be presented at a safety meeting. It could be talked about at the toolbox. So that way, if something, again, we don't want injuries to happen. It's not like, I don't think anyone goes to work saying, I'm going to hurt today. Like I don't think that's anyone's MO, but unfortunately, accidents and injuries do happen. And it's like, okay, so what do you do? Because ultimately you can't just throw your hands up. And something that also that you mentioned. So in my past, I used to get so mad when people called me just my job. It's like, And you could be, it has nothing to do with injury. It has everything to do with like the task at hand. It's like, oh, no, you don't even know what you're talking about. You're just a driver. And I'm like, no, I'm not. But that attitude, that's a huge, like, that's a big wall to me between me and the supervisor is, I don't know, you don't even value me as a person. So when you're talking about the 3 levels of care, and number 3 is, I just care about you as a person. It's the right thing to do. Injury or not, how you treat people at your place of work is super important, because ultimately, if something did happen, you want the full truth. You want to know, okay, I see what happened, because I want to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. I want to make sure that you're okay. Obviously, if there's like forms you got to fill out, are you physically capable? Okay, yes, you are. Like, we got to go, like, there's all of those steps. And if someone gets the heebie-jeebies from you, I like that expression, because you're just an ass all of the time, and all of a sudden you're trying to be nice. It doesn't really work that way. So but yeah, anyway, I think what you hit was really, really important. So thanks for that.
Well, I appreciate you using the word just, because when we talk about language and the meanings, if I say just, that actually just means only. It means only. Just equals only. So whenever you use the word just with someone, what they interpret is only. So if I say you're just a driver, you're only a driver. Everything else has been removed. Like you said, it's been stripped away, and it's part of the identity. And where you see issues happen, you can have a great culture in a company where things are going well. And, it's those ones where when you ask your employee, if your employee's out in public and someone asks them, what do you do? I work for this company and I do this, right? And then they get in trouble. They have an injury, they have an incident, they have something that goes on. And maybe they feel the company didn't take care of them the way that they were supposed to be. It's like breaking up with a girl or with a guy. It's like, what do you mean you're not going to take care of me that way? You're not going to this and that. And all of a sudden, this 10-year employee who's been stellar takes a personal, because they said, I've given you everything. And now when I really need you, not just a paycheck, but I really need you, where am I?
Yes. And I think that happens too often. I don't know if it's the supervisor getting defensive and here's the bus that I'm going to drive you over, but I think, yeah, we can be quick to forget, unfortunately, a 10-year history. And I talk about this in a different approach, but you could do a really good job for 10 years and not hear anything. No compliments, no feedback, no annual review, no nothing. And you have one bad moment, 12 seconds that just wasn't ideal. And you get like Zeus attacking you, and you're just like, whoa, what is going, like, all credibility is gone. I hate this company now, instead of bragging about it at dinner. So I think, yeah, those are just really key things. So when you're talking about training, is there specific training that you offer to help establish the plan, but also how to fulfill and execute the plan in the event something happens? Is that kind of in your modulars, or how does the training work?
So the training is completely customizable, and it depends on the needs of the client. So some clients, all they need is an online course. I actually had a safety person call me a couple of weeks ago, and they said, listen, I'm on a flight up north. We just had an incident, and I'm not sure how to do this and this. And, they're literally getting on the flight, so we're not going to be able to talk about this. But they were able to go online on the website, plug, and download the course. By the time they landed, they went through the whole course, because it explains what it was. And then what I said was, if you still run into issues or something doesn't make sense, or it's a little more complicated, call me or call one of my consultants. We'll coach you through it. So where we work on is, if you've ever seen the movie Roadhouse with Patrick Swayze, it's one of my favorite movies, is he goes into a bar, right? The bar is not one of these bars you want to go into. It's really rough, but he goes in, he cleans it up. He teaches the bouncers how to bounce properly, how to make it a place that people want to come to. And then he essentially hands over the company, the bar, back to the owner. And he's taught them how to maintain it so that it continues. Same concept. If you have issues with WCB and your program and claims management, appeals, or this, we come in, we can train your staff, we can coach, we can do all these things, and then we hand it back over to you. If you're working with a consultant right now that's not us, we've decreased consulting costs, because what we've done is we've gone in and helped you manage more efficiently, which decreases the consulting costs, and it decreases the reliance on WCB, because most clients, and if anyone's listening and disagrees, feel free to email me. But most clients, when they run into a claim, because there's not enough volume, that's the biggest issue, is that most people either don't have the time to spend, even if they had the volume, or they don't have the volume. So the things that they learn just doesn't stick with them. Because I mean, geez, Lou, we've got 15 million other things to think about. So what do you do when you have an incident? You call WCB and you ask the case manager. But sometimes the case manager doesn't know. And it definitely does. They definitely don't spend the time to understand the employer side from the way that we've been lucky to, me and my consultants, is that we've spent 10 years in the industry from an employer perspective. We've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so what we do is we help navigate that with you so that when you have an issue, don't worry about retaining the knowledge if you don't want it. We'll coach you through it. And that's been the big difference. So really it's completely different. Some people want the training, then they want the ongoing mentorship. Some just want mentorship and no training. Some want it, whatever they want. That's what we give them.
Nice. And I think that's super powerful because like I talk about pivotal impact all the time, and you're able to offer multiple pivotal impacts in that moment where this is just what happened. I'm on my way to site. What do I do? Well, I can't talk to you obviously on an airplane, but I can show you this. Take this. You got questions? Call me back. They land. They feel empowered, which I think is key because I think some training, it's almost like a crutch instead of empowerment. And it's like, hey, you're going to limp your way through it. And I was like, no. You're going to rock yourself through it. And you're going to make sure that employee is okay. Obviously, you're not going to get kicked off site. Like there's so many wins that you're empowering people. So you're creating pivotal moments. I think that part is super cool. But also from a consulting perspective, because so we have a common friend, Eric, and it's really cool. So he shared advice not too long ago where he says most consultants, they start after they quit their 9 to 5 and they think in their minds, I'm going to offer what I was doing in my 9 to 5. That's not real life when it comes to consulting. Consulting is, I'm going to listen to what this individual needs, if it's a company, if it's a person, and I'm going to work with that person. So that way I'm flexible. So they feel important, but they're getting what they actually need, not what I think they want because it fit my 9 to 5. So exactly what you're doing is we're working together. We've seen it. We've been through it. Okay, this is how we navigate through it. And it's not going to necessarily hammer your premiums or give you a bad reputation or make your employees afraid of you. It's okay, they're taking this seriously. So I think there's some huge wins just working with you and your team.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah. And a lot of times when an incident happens, what we forget, is that the employer is sometimes just as scared as the worker when someone gets hurt. Because if I don't handle this properly, what does this mean? And I don't know how to handle this properly. So I'll get off the phone with a client after talking with them for half an hour, and they're going, it's Friday afternoon, and they're saying to me, I can actually go sleep tonight. I can enjoy my weekend because I know things are under control. And that's what it is when it comes to WCB, is that you're trying to control the claim, give the worker everything they're legally entitled to in the most cost-effective way for the company. And then it's more of a win-win. When you deal with things that way, and that's what I was saying, we chase feelings, is sometimes people call me because they just need that confidence boost that things are going to be okay. And that's what a coach does. A coach takes you to what your potential is or where you need to be that you can't even see. Right. So if I can give any advice to people out there, is that there's nothing to worry about, whether you're a worker or an employer. If your employer or as a company, if you know what you're doing, or you have someone in your corner to help you to know what you're doing, doesn't matter what the situation is. I still get surprised from time to time with claims, but for the most part, I've realized that 80% of the problems can be fixed with just a few solutions. But I've had the luxury and the time and to learn these things. And now I want to give that to the people, is that if I can help you sleep at night, if I can help put some more money in your pocket, that's my job.
Yes. And I think that's super powerful. I have a question. So I talk about legacy quite often, and we've talked about this before, but before we dive into legacy, what has been, you mentioned maybe I'll rephrase the question. So you mentioned helping people sleep at night, and I think that will tie into your answer, but what has been the best thank you that you've received, that you and your team worked with the client, they were pulling what hairs they have left out of their head, they were losing sleep, you helped prevent the boat from sinking per se, but what was if you can, I know that's kind of on the fly, but what has been for you the most impactful thank you that you've heard so far?
Oh boy. I'm going to give one from the worker side and one from the employer side, because I think it's important that we recognize both sides. So there was a worker who had a significant injury. He fell from a height, and they actually didn't think he was going to make it. And so when we were working together, as part of my responsibility, I would make sure that he understood what the WCB process would look like for him and his injury. And this was a guy that was a hardworking guy, very driven. And I remember him calling me and just unloading things, worried about his family, worried about, how he was going to do things with his kids again, how he was going to be with his wife. Could he be the husband that he always was and provide for them? Or was he this guy that, was going to have to be reliant on like a social system or a program to pay his wages and this? And he was so scared. And then I remember him telling me, like, he'd go to certain facilities and he goes, there's so many sad people here. And at the end of the whole process, he actually ended up changing careers because he couldn't continue doing the one that he was doing. But he ended up having a successful career. Our paths crossed unknowingly 7 years later. We lost contact for 7 years. And this is where it came in, is he said, if you weren't there to guide me and tell me that this was going to happen to make sense, I don't know where I'd be, because the toughest part for me was the uncertainty. And in the midst of the uncertainty, you were able to provide some certainty where you couldn't guarantee me the outcome, but you told me, if you do this and you go down this road, your chances increase dramatically. And he said, what I noticed was it was my mindset that needed to be addressed. And truthfully, stepping out of that story for a second, after 15 years, the difference between someone who has a traumatic injury and can overcome it and someone who has a traumatic injury and doesn't is the mindset. And I recognize that sometimes it's a WCB decision that hurts you, where you're trying to get certain benefits and you can't. And you're like, screw WCB, the world's falling apart. And, you're mad at the employer, you're mad at WCB, you're mad at this. But at the end of the day, this guy showed me that in light of those things, his focus was on something bigger. And Viktor Frankl talks about that, right, in his book, where he talks about you need something bigger to point yourself to, something that pulls you through that. And so, no, he didn't go back to his job. No, he didn't do these things, but he was able to return to some form of life that was greater than what he had before. And he found a new calling in a new way. And so for that reason, that was a thank you in my book. From an employer perspective, when I first started my consulting firm, it was the first couple of years in, I got a phone call from a company. Now, some industries, they need safety statistics and WCB premiums in order to bid work and get contracts. That's just a part of the life that certain industries live in. So he actually, it was his wife calls me and she's in a panic. She says, look, if we don't get this fixed, we got to close the doors. And they were a small company, less than 50 people. And they're saying, I got to lay all these people off. How are they going to put food on their table? Like, they're counting on us. And what do? We were able to figure out that situation. I was able to look at the policies, find a different way of managing the claim that they were unaware even existed. And from that, we were able to control the premiums, control the safety statistic, and able to get them the documentation they needed to stay on site, which kept the doors open. And they remain my client for the last almost 10 years now. So so that's just another one there.
Good. See, so why I asked that, instead of asking your thoughts on legacy, because we have dove into that before, is that's part of your legacy. And I think that as people that really care, we're number threes, we care about people. I think that's part of, honestly, the best legacies is when you're like, no, because I think we're too busy often to even think about who we've actually helped along the way. But when you have those, well, I know who I've helped. And to me, I'm like, okay, that really empowers industry, because there's so much of that. So again, to our listeners, call to action. Think about, okay, who have you received a thank you from because you went out of your way to help them? That's part of your legacy. So when I'm referring to legacy, that's what I'm talking about, is we're in an environment where, okay, we helped something maybe it wasn't even better, but we made the situation more peaceful and we made the situation more clear, and people can actually understand, okay, this is all it is. yeah, so don't worry about these 900 things because it's not relevant. It's this. So again, that's the point of the question, is to really drive out the fact that we all have that ability. We can all change a life. We can all create what I call, again, a pivotal impact. But it's really nice to know that for yourself, you can see it from both perspectives basically instantly, because again, you're helping people. So I think that's really cool to highlight, and I appreciate that.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, I I think I don't know. I don't think we ever know how many people we touch for certain things. And if you help someone make just a different decision, and someone explained it to me this way, is that if I help this person and because of that they decide to do something positive, which gets them to make a decision that leads to, let's say, finding that right person in their life, and they have a child, they would maybe never made that decision had not. So you're really creating another generation who you'll never know that. You'll never know that. And they'll never tell you. And they have no idea that that was, your role in it. So I like the hidden stories. I sit there and wonder about it, but that for me, I think there's enough crap in the world going on, that if you can go to sleep at night and say, I made some small difference because I chose to serve, and not be at level 1, be at level 3, even when the world needed me at level 1 or wanted me at level 1. And that's where I wanted to be, because I was so mad and I was so, these negative feelings. But I said, no, I'm going to be at level 3 today. And it's not easy. Oh, ask my wife. It's not easy. But I think you end up living a more fulfilling life. And really, fulfillment for me, it comes from growth and contribution. If I can grow as a person, if I can grow the community, if I can do that and contribute to something outside of myself, that's where fulfillment comes from. It doesn't come from the clients, the number of clients I have, the bank account, that it's service. And a lot of books that you read nowadays on leadership and everything is talking about it. But really, we've been talking about it for thousands of years. And, not to get religious, but there's a big book there that talks all about service. So for me, that's what I've tried to adopt. And that's the essence of the company, is that we are here to serve. And when you're at level 1, we'll help you get to level 3. We'll show you how to get to level, and it doesn't cost a lot of money. It's not as painful as people think. We'll show that. So I appreciate that question, because I don't think that's one that I really spent a lot of time considering. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Totally. Yeah. And that's a strong answer, because I think often being a light in a dark place, it's tough. Sometimes it's humbling. Sometimes it's not self-sacrifice per se, but especially with the power of the keyboard warriors out there. And I try and look on the positive. I try only interact, especially publicly, in the positive. Like, my wife hears me vent, and I try and keep it to that, because I'm like, people don't always want to hear when I'm mad, and I can get mad. I'm a human, but I think, doing the right thing, even when it's hard, is still the right thing. And I think just operating as men of character is really important too, especially as we navigate, because even when you're mentioning your other article and how COVID is impacting employers and employees, you need to talk about it, because it's not something that's just, if I ignore it, like the ostrich effect, put my head in the dirt and it doesn't exist. It's like, no, we need to navigate through it, but you can do it appropriately, professionally, again, with character and integrity. So I just think you've done a really good job, Anthony, once again, highlighting WCB Consulting, highlighting yourself as just a professional. And I like words like character and integrity, because not everyone operates that way. Some people are very fast to say, here's my Square machine, tap the credit card. And we're not going to talk any further till I hear a tap, tap, tap. And it's like no, yes, money is part of success, but ultimately, like I said, it's a life of service. So I just wanted to highlight that. But yeah, just with respect to time, and I know we're going to be doing more episodes, which I'm super jacked on. As we do come to close today, is there any final thoughts you would like to share? As well as, can you drop the website again where people can go just to learn more about you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me at WCBConsulting.ca. On the website, we have our library of online courses. We also have a common questions area. So you mentioned an article. We did release a couple articles regarding COVID and vaccines and how WCB looks at those things. It's straightforward. It's just answers. There's no opinions really attached to it. This is how they're looking at it, and that's what it is. Yeah, LinkedIn. So we just got a company LinkedIn page, which we're trying to grow followers to. So feel free to subscribe there. My personal LinkedIn, Anthony Butkovic, is also there. And we do have a YouTube channel. We're working on it. Ever since they started coming out with 4K cameras, I've been shy to do videos. So no, it's just joking. But no, so really LinkedIn, YouTube, our website. And also if you have questions, drop us a line. Like, it's not about having a contract with us or anything like that. If you have a question, I get people emailing all the time with random one-off questions. It gives me ideas for articles. I can answer your email. Me or one of my consultants will do that. So yeah, there's that. So you asked a question about any final thoughts. The world is not a warm and fuzzy place. Doesn't really like to talk about the warm and fuzzy stuff. And I think the biggest thing is, we're not going to agree on everything, whether you're the worker or the employer. We're not going to agree on certain things, but if we learn how to communicate, that's the first step. Learn how to communicate with the person. And, in the movie, The Green Book, it says there's a scene in there where the person says, "I don't want to call my brother." And then Viggo Mortensen says, there's a lot of lonely people in this world afraid to go first. Because he says, he knows where I am. He can call me. If you're a company, if you're an employer, you're dealing with a situation, go first. Open the lines of communication. Understand the meaning behind what the person is saying. Because once you understand the meaning, you can start solving problems. And once you open that line of communication, take responsibility for your part. Take the responsibility. Start looking at, how can you change the way that you've been dealing with that situation, and then solve the problem together. And if that other person doesn't want to communicate with you, that's fine. That's their choice. But I always say, don't stop, because you never know what changes in a person's life where they will need you again, or they'll change their perspective. So yeah, it's not trying to get warm and fuzzy, but as soon as we start looking out for our own interests, service goes out the window, trust goes out the window. Everyone's looking out for their, number one, and we don't solve problems. And so I hope the world accepts that a little bit more and just that. But we're living in some crazy times. So the more we can serve one another, look after one another, honestly and genuinely, that's when we start making the world a better place. And it comes from good information. So if you're looking for good information, there's lots of places to find it. Truck Focus Podcast is a great one. Plug. So yeah. And so thank you so much I'm rambling now, but thank you so much for having me and allowing me to share my thoughts and my words on these topics.
Yes. Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. And I'll give you your $10 for that plug too. So thanks. But just kidding. But I think that's really important. And that's a great way to end, because that's a segue to the next interview, as I'd say anyway. But it's absolutely right. And so when you're talking about that, I kept thinking about my experience when I worked in the oil field in Northern Alberta. I'm very pro oil, so go Alberta. And I remember countless times, because my nickname was Nice Guy. And like, you don't belong up here. You're too nice. And I'm like, okay, what does that mean? Like, so you're navigating. And I remember it was probably just over a year in, myself and my friend Jeff, we were really, I'd say, large contributors to the shift of our crew, because when I first got, it was really rough, tough type attitude. And I don't live in that very well. And I'm like, okay. And then all of a sudden, it took about a year, I would say, where people would laugh and people would have like intimate conversations about what they actually cared about. And by that point, I was in my life coaching training too. And yeah, I remember being like, what does this mean? So I always think of the quote, okay, you're going to mock me now, but you're going to remember me later. You're going to mock me now, but you're going to remember me later. And you're going to remember the fact that if you're a company and maybe I wasn't the best at asking how you're doing, but I'm trying to change, they're going to mock you for it. They're going to mock you for it, but then they will remember you for it. And they will say, no, that supervisor, yeah, he used to be a jerk, but no, he's really nice now. He actually cares about how I'm doing. So you build that culture, but you have to be willing to say, hey, I'm willing to take it on the chin. I wasn't always the best. And then, because especially right now, you're right, where pandemic, that's tough. Blockades, that's tough. COVID, sure, that's tough. But there's just a lot of worry right now. And I think when you can just naturally be, not naturally, that's the wrong word, but I think if you can just intentionally be open, and I like how you said, go first, if you can intentionally smile first, if you can intentionally ask the questions just to build that, hey, my door is open type policy, it makes a world of difference, especially when you need it. So I think just, everything that you shared though, that especially at the end was really rock solid. So I'm grateful that you came back, but I'm stoked to do more. And I'm just excited to really just continue to highlight your journey in this space. So thanks again, man. I do appreciate it very much.
Oh, thank you. Likewise.
So awesome. Okay. Well, enjoy the rest of your fine day, but yeah, thanks again. And yeah, we'll talk soon.
All right, buddy.
See you, man. Bye. Anthony, man, thank you so much for coming back to the podcast and all of the valuable information that you shared in our conversation today. So a huge takeaway for myself was when you talked about the 55-38-7 rule with communication, as well as the cost associated to how we communicate. So to our listeners, I really encourage you to connect with Anthony on LinkedIn, as well as on his website, which is WCBConsulting.ca, to learn more about the incredible services that they're offering to our industry, as well as checking out the training that he's provided. It's honestly industry's best. So again, Anthony, thank you so much for taking the time to hop on. And before you leave, I ask that you like this episode and share it out. Again, as Anthony talked about, so many different hidden factors that you wouldn't normally think about, or maybe it's not on your typical day-to-day conversation, but it's truly having an impact in your life, as well as from an organizational perspective on your costs, on your employee retention. And that's how are we communicating with people? So again, Anthony, thank you so much. As always, I hope you have a great day, and let's create a pivotal impact. Bye.